hallelujah. I have my good mic plugged in. Now it's plugged in, yes it is. And this should work. I hope it does. Alright! Let's see. Sounds good. Alright! Let's try this again. Yeah. We'll just pretend that the other video I made never existed. Converted man here. Yeah, I might have decided to negate my own self and talk about a politics thing, and then I'm like, my brother said my mic sucked, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm using the crappy mic, and why am I talking about politics? So instead, we'll talk about Daily Dose of Wisdom. Hi, Luke of Paris, and they're still wrong about everything and still dumb. So, they're talking about the thing or the guy is talking to the other people, the thing that it's like, oh man. So he's responding to this video and then I'm responding to the video that he's responding. So many layers. Okay, so, jeez. Where to begin? I mean, I could start at the start, but that's not, well. So he says the suffering makes God's existence unlikely. Got my moving around done? No, I'm not doing. No. There's stuff I should be doing, but instead I'm doing this video.
The very mechanism that God chose to bring about the human species as the ultimate end of his creation was one that is imbued with suffering, such that 99.9% of all the species, let alone animals, that have ever existed on planet Earth have been brutally wiped from existence into extinction. And I think that that's less likely on theism. If you assume atheism or materialism, not only do you explain this, you also come to expect it.
Now that I hope gets answered, because I really am curious. How does atheism or materialism, by the way, he's conjoining those, not me. How does it explain this? How does...
Okay, so how does it explain it? And then he goes on to say versus describe it. So explaining, describing. So, yeah.
Materialism explain it? Does he mean just describe? And when he says expect, I guess he's saying that if there isn't a good and loving and powerful God, all of this death just is what it is. But I want to highlight at the same time, if that's the case, then there isn't really a moral component to it either. In other words, what's the...
Correct. There isn't a moral component. Saying suffering is not a moral stance. It is a stance reflecting on the fact that creatures experience something that is not pleasurable to them, and they don't want to experience that experience. So, as far as explaining it in evolutionary terms, and I don't know this equivocation-ish of explain / describe. I don't know what the difference is that he's trying to make a big deal about, but whatever. It's perfectly understandable via biological evolution that creatures would experience discomfort, pain, suffering, because that dissuades them from doing actions that will end their existence. So they need to know about the dangers around them that could cause them death or harm. And so it probably started very simply, like just a little, hey, there's a thing there. And okay, and so I'll avoid that thing, And then it got more, complicated, more pronounced as complexity increased. So, I hit my toe against the thing. It's like the nerve goes, ding, brain goes, ow. I say ow out loud and probably swear. And It's also that I know that something happened. But the question I would have is, well, fine, okay, but then it keeps going after that. Like, it's still hurting, it's still throbbing. I know that something happened to it, and there's nothing I can do about it per se. That is to say, I got to go to the doctor maybe, but or put ice on it or something. But once I begin to attend to it, why can't I just tell my brain, okay, I'm working on it, turn off the pain? That would not be something possible via evolution on its own. Highly, highly unlikely. You'd have to have guided evolution. You'd have to have genetic manipulation to get to that point, because getting there is way too sophisticated to do it by random mutation and selection over time. It's very unlikely. So, but if there was a caring being that made it this way, well, then why not give creatures the ability to turn off that pain once they go, okay, yes, I recognize that I'm being chomped on by a lion. There's nothing I can do about it. Turn off the pain. I'm gonna die, whatever. And then their brain would just be like, okay, and then they wouldn't suffer. That's only there like for a moment, or maybe it doesn't hurt, but it just lets you know that what happened where, and then maybe even tells you what to do about it, or there's so many other possible solutions that a thinking being could produce rather than the system we have, whereas evolution perfectly explains all those things. Yes, daily dose of wisdom. Did I put something else for the name? No.
Problem. It's not actually bad that all of these animals are dying if atheism, materialism is true. It's not actually a bad thing, but it sounds to me like Alex feels that it is a bad thing.
What is your epistemology? How do you know that this is the case, that it's less likely, and that an atheist worldview, a naturalistic worldview would look like the way it is today?
Of course, we don't know, but that's why I use the phraseology of unlikely. I think that if you were to tell somebody who was sort of in some Rawlsian state of nature, hadn't seen the world, and you said that the world has been created by an omnibenevolent, all-powerful God, what kind of world would that person be imagining? And if you dropped them into the world, if you were given the opportunity to become a wild animal, like in 2 seconds, I was just going to turn you into a random wild animal somewhere on planet Earth.
I like being a guy.
I think you'd probably kill yourself before I had the opportunity,
Okay.
because you know that the life of these animals is almost defined in terms of their suffering.
I guess I just don't really see how you can justify that claim per se. Evil itself doesn't have ontology. Evil's not a thing. You don't look under a rock and say, there's the evil, right?
Fine by
And
me.
so
I'm not really talking about evil here, because that's, of course, a moral term. I'm talking about suffering.
can you distinctualize suffering and evil?
So evil is a moral term. Evil means that something is bad, it's immoral. You need to have a moral ontology for that. Suffering is just any experience that's not wanted when experienced.
So if he's not talking about evil, then how does his claim hold any weight in terms of it making the existence of God less likely? And also,
and see, there you've missed the point almost deliberately. Suffering is not desired by creatures. We don't like it. Go ahead, stub your toe, see if you enjoy that. Hit yourself in the thumb with a hammer. It's gonna hurt, and it's gonna hurt, and it's not a good idea, and you don't want to do it, and why does it feel that way as opposed to some other way? Again, via just evolution, yeah, my body has to warn me that stuff is going wrong so I can attend to it. But my body doesn't know that I'm attending to it. I No, but I can't tell my body, hey, stop delivering the pain signals. I'm working on fixing it, you know. So why is that? You know, how is that? Why is that not a thing? Because if we humans, and maybe we can, if we can make it that we could turn off our pain, then I think we would be. It's sort of like, okay, if I have a giant needle that I can push into you and give you a shot with, but it's very painful, versus a very thin needle to do the same exact shot, am I not obligated to use the smaller needle? Because I know the bigger one will cause you more pain and suffering. And so if you say that God is loving, and I understand loving to be a certain parameter of things, that I care about other people. I don't want them to suffer. I don't want myself to suffer. Now, I know that that's part of life, but I desire it to not be, or at least not be as much. Like, why does it have to hurt so much? Couldn't it hurt a little bit less? You know, or could it maybe not last as long? Or, you know, again, once I reckon, I go, bink, hey, something happened. Okay, cool. All right, I'm going to go take care of that. You know, why not do it that way? Because that would be more loving and caring than letting you suffer for however long your body feels like it. And then, like, if a nerve gets pinched or whatever, and it just hurts all the time, you know, that's not good. Now, of course, now not feeling any pain is dangerous, because then, you know, if you get a cut, and you start bleeding and you feel no pain at all, you're not aware that you're bleeding, and that could kill you. So, yeah, there has to be some mechanism that tells you to be aware of this, but does that mechanism have to hurt? Why could it not just be, you know, beep, beep, hey, your leg has been cut? You know, and heck, if I'm designing things from the ground up, why would I make it that you can get your leg cut in the first place? Just give you a leg that can't be cut, give you a body that can't be injured. You know, I mean, it just, he doesn't get it because he doesn't want to get it. He doesn't understand that this negates really a loving God. It doesn't negate a non-loving God. It negates a loving God. But of course, he's going to have all sorts of excuses for why his God permits suffering.
So I don't really buy that he's not talking about evil, because, in other words, is there a problem with suffering or is there not? If there is a problem with suffering, which I think he definitely believes that there is, as do I, then we are basically talking about morality. If we're saying suffering shouldn't exist, it ought not to exist, we might not be talking about evil per se, but we are talking about the difference between is and ought. And I think he's basically smuggling in an ought here, namely that suffering ought not to exist. He wishes that it didn't. His moral sensibility tells him that there's something wrong about suffering. And obviously I agree, but I just think that to avoid the moral component of suffering takes away any power of the argument if you're using suffering to claim that it's unlikely for God to exist in light of it. If there isn't a God, then animals just suffer and that's it. As Richard Dawkins says, at the bottom is blind, pitiless indifference. There's no good, there's no evil. Things just are as they are. However, if there is a God, then it is also possible, or even likely, that there is a reason for the suffering that exists, and that
All right, like I said, he's going to have some excuse that permits the loving God to permit suffering. I what it's just why, how it's inconceivable. It just baffles me how you could say, well, maybe there's some reason for it. Man, it better be a damn good reason. But you don't know what that reason actually is. You're saying there might be a reason. Okay. But then you're not loving. In the term of how I conceive the word loving to be, which is I don't want suffering to be a thing that it is. I would want it to be something different. There are, like I already said, there's several different ways it could work instead of how it does work. And maybe with our scientific breakthroughs that people come up with, we'll get to that place. We'll replace nerve endings with chips that make a buzz noise. Beep. Okay. Is that annoying? It doesn't happen. Bing, bing. Your left leg is now in pain. Oh, okay. Or your left leg has been cut. Please attend to it immediately. Whatever. Or it just calls 911 for you. Bing. This person has been shot in the shoulder. Please come and fix their shoulder immediately, whatever, and then, it's just like the ambulance people show up and like, hey, how's it going? Yeah, you got shot in your shoulder. Oh, yeah, I did. Oh, okay. All right. Thanks for, Or again, why make it that your body can be harmed? Why not give you a body that can't be harmed at all, ever, under any circumstance? What would be wrong with that? So, to justify suffering, the only thing he can do is say, well, maybe God has some reason. And I'm like, well, maybe, but then it's not loving in the term of loving that I have for myself and other creatures out there that exist and have to deal with suffering. Then it's a sort of, I don't know what loving means anymore. So this negates a loving creature that can do anything, because I recognize loving to be something completely different than you do. And you're saying, well, maybe it knows something that you don't know. And so then it's not loving anymore. Then it's a different type of love that I'm not familiar with at that point.
Again, that what we're experiencing now is a sliver of the whole picture. To judge, for example, childbirth in isolation of the life that it produces, you could easily think, wow, childbirth is really bad. There's no future upside that could possibly outweigh this downside. But then when you see that, oh, actually childbirth generates a life, I think that you can see in context that suffering is actually worth it. And
well, that didn't resolve anything, because guess what? We have medicine that makes it so that you don't feel as much or maybe any pain during childbirth. So what reason is there that a loving, caring being couldn't build women in a way where they wouldn't suffer at all during childbirth, or whoever it was that was giving birth? Hell, make it that both sexes can have birth. Make it completely painless. Why is there pain at all? It's perfectly understandable, again, under evolutionary terms, because, again, the body, has to expand this thing, and there's bones in the way and all sorts of stuff, and it's a difficult process. But we humans said, no, we don't like that women suffer, so let's make a way that they don't have to do that. And we figured out how to do that. So whatever purpose there was, we removed that. So are we defying God's desire for humanity to suffer? Are we taking away from God's plan by getting rid of that suffering? I don't know. I don't think he would ever answer a question like that. He'd probably, there's some reason for it. Well, what's the reason? We got rid of it. Why can't God get rid of it?
And I just don't know how Alex can say that the suffering that we're seeing on this planet doesn't fall into the same category of potentially being worth it if God, right? Because if God is real, and in particular, let's remember, this video is one atheist versus 20 Christians. So now we have to talk about if the Christian God is real, then it's certainly likely that there is a justification for or an assessment of the present condition of this world that God is making that is going to be fully worthwhile in the long run. I think of Tim Keller, who said, why does God allow evil and suffering to continue? And we look at the cross of Jesus and we still do not know what the answer is. We don't know what the answer is as to why God will allow evil and suffering to continue. However, we do know what it isn't. We do know what the answer isn't. It can't be that he doesn't love us. And I think that that's important. If you really...
Yes, it can be. Jesus supposedly died for sin. Okay, so then the negative effects of sin, which corrupted and made the world fall, well, they're still here. So what is it that Jesus died for? So they play this shell game where they say Jesus died for your sins, but that doesn't negate the world's problems. But what it does do is if you believe that idea, then when you die, you get to go to a nice place. Of course, if you don't believe that idea, well, then when you die, you go to the bad place. But look, don't worry about that. You're going to believe in this thing, obviously. And that all somehow makes sense. Except it doesn't. Because you're adding so many complexities to that. It's like, one day, God will make everything okay. So the ends justify the means according to God. Then that's not a loving being. And then the Christian God is not a loving being according to how I think of love. Now, you could say, well, you just got it wrong, deconverted man. You don't understand what love is. This is love. And I'm like, well, I don't recognize that. I don't. I just don't. So how is that possible?
Again, this is, as Alex says in this video at a different point, this is an internal critique. But if you're gonna critique the God of Christianity internally, then you have to do so in light of the counterfactuals as well. And a very significant one of those counterfactuals would be the incarnation, the death, and the resurrection of Christ. The incarnation, meaning he's willing to enter into our suffering. The death of Christ, meaning that God is willing to suffer more greatly than anyone.
No. The torture that Jesus supposedly went through is pretty rough. You know, he's flogged, whipped in the back by, this whip with extra little bits on it. And supposedly a crown of thorns was put on his head, which is just kind of annoying more than anything else. Made fun of, how to drag a big heavy piece of wood, and then, hangs on it for a while, however many hours. Doesn't even really say how long, I don't think. And then dies. Well, that's bad, but it's not the worst thing ever. It's not. People have suffered horrible tortures, way worse than that. But see, Christians like to pretend that Jesus also took on all the sins of the world, and that hurt him too somehow. But it doesn't say that. If you wanted to impress me with how Jesus suffered, it could have been far greater than that. But it was in all of eternity, he has, one moment of extraordinary pain and then goes back to an eternity of pleasure. That's not good enough. And that he's joining in the suffering doesn't take away that there's suffering. It just means I'm going to participate in the suffering. Well, la-di-fucking-da. How about you make it so that we don't suffer anymore? How about you make it that we never suffered in the first place? Why not do it that way? Well, because my plan is to die in a gruesome way so I can feel pain too. and that somehow makes it okay. No.
But then the resurrection, God in the flesh on this planet, transcending death and offering us in that transcendence over death hope. I think these are all really important counterfactuals. The insistence in the New Testament that all things are becoming new, and that in fact there is a time coming when every tear will be wiped away, when the wolf will lay down with the lamb, and so on.
Yes, one day it will all be good and wonderful and terrific. That's nice, but what about, again, this is an end justifies the means. So, hey, captive desk, we're pretty good pals, I'd say. Would you mind if I, put your hand on a table and got a hammer and just smashed your hand for, I don't know, 5-10 minutes, let's say? I really just let you have it. And then after that, I was like, hey, here's $1,000 or $10,000 or whatever, And that makes up for me smashing your hand. Would we still be buddies and pals after that? I don't think so. I think you'd be like, you're insane, for smashing my hand. I don't like that you did that. And the money that you're giving me now doesn't make up for the fact that you smashed my hand. I didn't want you to do that. I didn't agree to this, This is madness. You're insane. I don't want anything to do with you. Obviously, it's a made-up scenario, so we're cool. We're still buddies and pals. But if I did it for real, it'd be, I guess I'd have to strap them down, to do it. But, but you get what I'm saying. It's like, this is nuts. Like, oh, hey, we'll send you to jail for 5 days, and you eat nothing but bread and water, solitary confinement, see nobody, interact with nobody. The bread and water's just come in this little slot, and there's a toilet in there, and that's it, sink, and that's it, and a bed, and but after that 5 days, then we give you a car, a brand new car, electronic, it runs on solar, it's great, it will never break down. Does that make up for it? No, it doesn't make up for it. I mean, it'd be nice to have the car, but now, if you agree to do something like that, that's one thing. If I say, hey, look, do you want to do this insane, crazy thing for this wonderful reward? And you're like, yeah, sure. That's one thing. Okay. But to force it upon you and then go, well, it's okay because I gave you this wonderful, nice gift afterwards is nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And we know that. We recognize that. Because when we see humans do that, we go, no, that doesn't make up for it. That doesn't make sense. And then it gets worse in Christianity, because in Christianity, if you don't believe the right thing, not only do you suffer in this life, but then you suffer forever because you dared not believe in the right thing. So how does that make any sense?
We're given enough of a picture of the new creation and enough of a picture of the idea that we are in the middle of a process. So that's why I go to childbirth, because that is a process generating life. I believe that the human experience that we're having right now is a process generating eternal life, generating eternity.
So here's a question. A deer gets its leg caught under the branch of a tree that's fallen over in the wild, and it starves to death in confused agony. Why does God oversee this? And why does God set the natural world up such that events like this occur?
Okay, I guess the last thing I'll say, because he gives the example of a deer caught in a thicket. The last thing I would say is that God doesn't set up the natural world in order for this deer to suffer. Rather, the suffering of this deer is a byproduct of the fallen creation that man brought about. So we really have to look first to ourselves.
What a string of insane justification this is. So the deer got caught in, well, he said barbed wire. I would have it be a hole in the ground just to remove man interference completely. A deer's foot gets caught in a hole in the ground, breaks its leg, and it's stuck there. And it's suffering from the leg, it's suffering from food, maybe you can eat some stuff around it, but it's suffering dehydration, and it just slowly withers and dies. And that's because we did something a long time ago that upset God. Wow, what an asshole. So God doesn't care about the deer at all, because God set up the system where the deer would suffer and blame it on humans rather than taking personal responsibility for setting up the system in the first place. Christians, broadly speaking, at least the apologetic type, don't get what it is they're even trying to argue for, because they don't even understand their own story and what the implications are of following it through. Two people, one person doesn't know, neither two people don't know good or bad. They don't know right or wrong. So God tells them, don't do this thing. They do not know that obeying God is a good idea because they don't know what good is. Also, there's a trickster, a Naga, more than likely, but whatever. And it tricks Eve into doing what God said not to do. And God let that trickster do that. God let Eve get tricked. He didn't step in to say, hey, what's going on here? No, trickster. I told them not to do this. You're not gonna mess up my plan here. God was chilling. It was walking around the garden, looking around. It wasn't paying attention or something. No, God knew exactly what would happen. It knew that the trickster would trick Eve. It knew that Eve didn't know any better. And it knew this and let it happen and let Eve tell Adam to do the thing. And then, oh, well, you disobeyed me. Now everybody is punished forever because that's how it goes. Duh. Why not just not make it that way? I don't know. Let them know what good and evil is, so that then they can then it's a real actual thing. Get rid of the trickster. Don't have the trickster, and have the scenario be Adam and Eve are chilling out. Don't eat from that tree. And they are the ones, knowing the difference between good and evil, they say, man, it looks really good. I mean, we've eaten everything else. Why are we not allowed for that? They convinced themselves to go against God. That would have been a better story to write. So one wonders, why isn't the story written that way? Well, there's lots of reasons, mainly because the story is ripped off from other stories that existed at that time and that they heavily borrowed from to make their story. So why it's a dumb story is because it was borrowed from other stories. It could have been a better story. It could have been a more coherent story. But it isn't, because that's not how it developed. So original sin isn't even a thing because we know Adam and Eve didn't exist. Okay, so what's that do? Well, that's a metaphor. It's a telling of a just so story of why are things bad? Because something happened. Well, what? We don't know exactly what happened, but something went wrong. Okay, we don't know what. Now we're told that it's people not obeying God. Maybe that's what it was. And if you want to be a believer, you'd have to say something happened, but I don't know what. But maybe instead of making it about Adam and Eve and all that, you say, well, in general, things are bad. Things are broken. And what went wrong was maybe that stuff wasn't perfect in the start, and it was always not perfect, and that God's trying to get it to be perfect. But that's a different story, right? It's a very different story, but it's still a plausible story. And yes, you're going to have to do creative thinking to make it fit into the Bible or whatever, but why not? Nothing's stopping you from saying that. And the thing is, it's you're so you're left with either a setup to fail scenario, or it always was imperfect from the start, and that's exactly how God had planned it. So you could just say the reason why animals suffer is because that's how God wanted it to be, or that's how God allows it to be. And we're not going to blame humans about it, because ultimately it would always be God's fault. And why is God doing this? I don't know. There's some reason. Who knows? We'll figure it out. Maybe God will tell us. I don't know, but maybe God's going to fix it at some point. And but again, you could to just try to make sense of the story as given by the apologist, it really falls apart in every possible way that it can, because it's like, look, they're set up to fail. Obviously, they're set up to fail. And so God wanted it to be imperfect. God wanted it to fall so that it could then send its son, so that it could die for itself in order to forgive a certain amount of people that happen to believe in that story. Wow.
But again, is it true that God is apparently making the assessment that, again, the good being gathered out of this reality outweighs the bad? Yes, that is clearly God's assessment. But again, if you have a problem with that assessment, then you really are saying you have a higher knowledge and a higher morality than the God who gave you both knowledge and morality, which just seems to be quite the audacious claim to make. So
yes, I would dare say I am more moral than your version of God. And that's not an audacious claim to make, because your version of God is created, well, by a human. In this case, this guy that's talking right now with this hat on. He's coming up with a God that allowed it to be screwed up, and then blames humans for it instead of taking personal responsibility, allows deers that have nothing to do with humans to suffer because stuff is bad in the world, and Adam and Eve ate something they weren't supposed to. So now a random deer has to suffer. What did deer ever do? I can understand punishing humans, maybe, I still think that was kind of messed up, but I could maybe understand that. It's like, okay, we did something bad, all right, okay, cool. And again, you remove the serpent and it makes more sense. But everything else also has to suffer? Why? Why are you that pissed off? It's like, it's not my fault. The world goes to shit because you disobeyed. Well, what about the other? Like, give the test to the other creatures. Like, whatever.
Anyways, those are some of my thoughts on just this first interaction. Like I said, if you guys like this video.
All right, we don't like the video. Okay, that's it. So yeah, he doesn't get the problem of suffering or evil, as many apologists just don't seem to comprehend it. Now, to be fair, I said many times, I don't understand, I can't comprehend what possible reason a being would have for us to suffer. And this being knows everything. But ultimately, that doesn't matter, because I look at it and go, what possible knowledge could you possess that makes the ends justify the means? The ends justifying the means is a terrible idea. But you're saying that there's some scenario that makes sense. And I'm like, I don't know what that scenario is. That doesn't make it impossible, but you haven't explained the scenario that makes it make sense. All you can do is reiterate your own beliefs about your mythology. You can't really explain why it is that God is doing this, because your book doesn't say that. It doesn't say the reason that God's doing this is X, Y, and Z. This is what's going to happen. This is why this is happening, or whatever. It doesn't do any of that, because that's not what it's about. You know, it is about, well, it's about a lot of things, but I think mostly it's about keeping itself alive as a theology. The Torah, Old Testament, is pretty self-contained, at least if the Jewish Torah. The Old Testament slightly, there's some changes that are made for the Protestant Catholic versions of the Old Testament. Maybe not major, but there are some. But the Torah is self-contained. The Jewish way of viewing God and humans is basically you do what you're supposed to, and God does whatever, and it doesn't necessarily intervene with your life. It doesn't, you might have bad stuff or good stuff happen to you, and it doesn't matter if you're good or bad. That good and bad stuff will happen, and you're just supposed to kind of like live with it and accept it, and kind of just live with this mystery of God, that God's mysterious, it's there, and it helps you to understand who you are to some degree. And then you're asleep when you die, and then at some point the savior of humanity comes, and everybody comes back to life, and then things will be wonderful. And that's kind of the Jewish idea, broadly speaking. Now, the Christian idea says, oh yeah, we like some of that, but we want to change that, And so then they add in their stuff, their mythology. They develop this character, the Redeemer, who doesn't do any of the things that the Savior that the Jews were waiting for would do, but does other stuff instead. And they make this guy into their guy and say, no, this guy is God, is part of God, is the way to God. I don't know, whatever. And that even though he didn't save us in the way the Jewish people thought he was going to, he saved us in a completely different way. And the Christians go, oh yeah, this makes sense, and that's their mythology. And then the Muslims have theirs, and the Mormons have theirs, and everyone has their own version and spin on this that are based on the thing. And other religions have different stories that they have. And what you'll notice, of course, if you do deep study of religion, you'll see that stories of the time when Genesis was written down, that there were stories circulating around that time period that are very similar to it. So it doesn't take a large leap to say that maybe the writer stole, plagiarized from those other stories, because they were popular, they were well known. So I'll just take those and I'll make it into mine. And we do this with songs even today. There's like that 4-chord thing that's like, I can play any song with just 4 chords. It's like, dozen 22 plus 30, 40 different songs that you can play just with 4 chords, And why? Well, I don't know. There's something about those chords that resonate with us, and that if you play them faster or slower in a different pattern or whatever, that you can make a song that people enjoy. So there's a huge number of songs you could hypothetically make that seems infinite, but actually there's a subset of that infinity that is realistic, of songs you can make that people will actually like, that's not infinite. It's a big number, but it's not infinite, so that's an interesting phenomenon. And I don't know why I'm going off into that tangent, but reasons. Yeah. That's why. It had something to do with what I was saying. We'll just pretend like it makes sense, okay? Oh yeah, religion. So that's kind of like what religion is. It's taking those four chords, something that resonates with us, and just kind of like, yeah, that's a story I like. Yeah, that's a story I like. So, well, what's the non-religious story? You know, what is the atheist story, if you will? Something happened 13 billion years ago, and then the universe began to expand. And a whole bunch of stuff happened, explosions, suns were made, elements were made, and then those suns exploded, and more elements were made. And because of gravity, that stuff shrunk into planets and stars, and one of them was us. And something happened on our planet where a bunch of elements combined with each other, and then over time more and more elements did that, and then some process begin to emerge from that complexity to what we would call life, and it started eating stuff, and then that made more stuff that made stuff to make more stuff, and it became more complicated, and then all that eventually led to this that we're doing, and then now we're here, and now what are we going to do? I don't know. I have no idea, but it's going to be interesting. And the way that reality really is, to me, is interesting enough. I think it's like, man, there's molecules and atoms, and scientists are trying to figure out how to manipulate DNA so that we don't age anymore. Meanwhile, in Japan, they figured out a thing to regrow teeth that they're testing. Oh my God, sign me up. And we're doing all these things that make it that we can live longer, healthier, do more fun things, experience different stuff. And maybe we'll figure out a way that we don't have to expire. Maybe not. I don't know. Or maybe, hell, even though it seems outlandish, maybe we'll figure out a way to grab the neurons, molecules, whatever, that are around and reform a brain of somebody that was dead, and that person can be alive again through science. Why not? And then if at that point, what does religion have to offer? If we create a way that we could come to be alive again, well, there's a different problem though. Eventually, our sun's going to expand and eat our entire us, and also the Andromeda galaxy will crash into us at the same time, just about. So that's a problem. So we're going to have to figure out how to make a sun, or move to a different solar system where there's a sun. But eventually, the universe is going to run out of energy, so we're going to have to figure that out too. But maybe we'll figure it out. Maybe we'll figure out a way to make it not do that and just exist for however long we would like to exist. But there'd have to be a button or something that you could press, that only you can press, and you know the code or whatever, and it like asks you, like, I don't know, like 20 times, are you sure? You know. And it's like, are you really, really sure? Yes. Are you very sure? Yes. Damn it. You know, I'm tired of existing. I've done everything I wanted to do, you know, and then you stop existing, and then that's that. That would be cool. And maybe that will happen, or maybe not. I don't know. But that's all within the realm of our actual reality. Some of it's far-fetched, some of it seems impossible, but if it is possible, then we can do it. If we humans learn to work together and help each other and learn science and logic and let go of these ancient religions and modern religions and superstitions that tie us down and keep us weighted with nonsense. Let us move forward by being skeptical until next time. And then after that, stay skeptical. Thanks for watching. No. I did a thing, yes I did a thing. Time to talk the thing. Ba, 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 ba. Electric skeptic likes me. It's very, very cool. This is why I adore you. Yes, I adore you too. Oh, yeah, but I also like this guy, Luke, and Captive Desk. And who else is in chat that I can mention? Nitty too. Oh, I love you. Yes, I do. Web expert, your face is poo. And this guy, Calastias, you do something, nerdy rodent. Ooh, I think I mentioned everybody. The end of the song for now. What's that? I lost all my subscribers again. Damn it!